Welcome to the Week 11 wrap-up here at this 13th season of Blood, Sweat, and Beers. We will look back at Week 11 and ahead to the playoff picture as it begins to take shape with just 3 games left. When we look back at Week 11, it was not a good week to be at the top. Our top 3 seeded teams, 1, 2, and 3, all sitting at 8 and 3, all lost. Now, 2 of those 3 teams didn't do themselves any favors. In fact, pretty much this week, all the losing teams chose to start a player or players who were injured and never even suited up, never got into the actual games. The only one who actually played all of the positions was Augustus Gloop 9. He actually lost the old-fashioned way. He earned it. But Hail Murray, Hold My Beer, Read Option, Light Rail Coyote, each one of them had a non-participant or more on their roster. Now, I realize that there were some IR implications and things with Light Rail Coyote's team, and we'll touch on that in just a minute. But really, other than Gloop, you didn't start a full roster, you lost this week, which was not good. The NFL saw a number of top-seeded teams, number of powerhouse teams lose as well, so there may be some sort of coincidence there. There may be a link because a lot of the top-seeded teams have players that we like to rely on. But if you look back, unfortunately, they all 3 lost, which means the playoff seeding didn't change at all. Because they're all still sitting at 8 and 3, and they all still have the same tiebreak situation, and so they're all still guaranteed to get into the playoffs. Wahoo! Oh, but let's go ahead and look at a couple of the losses here. Team Hoodad and Light Rail, props, Keith. 4 wins in a row. Very nice. Although I would say 3 wins and a non-loss, because this week I wouldn't say you won. I would say Light Rail Coyote lost. Don Chris really did everything he could to not win that game. It was pretty poor roster management all the way around. Sorry. And not just the IR situation. Obviously, we're still learning and trying to understand exactly when our roster gets locked down and when we aren't able to make any changes. So obviously not having a defense would have hurt. I think there were 11 defenses that were available that scored enough points that would have gotten him the win, scored 14 points, which is what he needed. So really, if he had just randomly chosen any one of those 11, he would have gotten the win. But even without that, I realized that Christian Kirk had a higher projected point total by a point than Mike Wallace, but I don't know where that number comes from. I realize DeAndre Hopkins is out, but you've got Colt McCoy slinging it back there. You are not likely to light it up, and so putting Christian Kirk in the flex instead of Mike Williams, that also cost you the win. So again, props Keith, and the slide looks like it's going to continue a little bit for Don Chris. Hopefully he's got some healthy players coming up and he'll right the ship. But 3 of the last 4 weeks, Light Rail Coyote has been under 100 points. So not a lot of confidence going into the playoffs, even though he's guaranteed to actually get to a playoff game. We also think about props to Kittens Mittens. We need to change that name. It should be something like Tiger Claws or something. 180 points. Best output of his for the week, best output of the week, and best of his on the season. It was kind of an interesting one. I don't know that that's sustainable, that 180, because it was really clumped into just 3 or 4 players. And in fact, Kittens Mittens top 3 players, Aaron Rodgers at almost 45, Justin Jefferson at 40, and then whoever had the 25 points, Nick Chubb at 25 points. Those 3 guys beat Read Option's team that he started. So that one wasn't really close. So props there too. Let's take a look at the playoff picture as we get into just the last 3 weeks of the regular season. The top seeds are still up in the air. Very likely, Augustus Gloop is going to get the number 1 or the number 2. He is 3 games up with 3 games to play, so depending on how it rolls out, very likely to end up with the number 1 seed in the West, which gives him a guaranteed bye week, whether it's 1 or 2 overall. And so as we look at his score, he's still top scoring team, even though this week the bye week really took its toll. And this was his lowest score of the season, still 110 points, still leading the league. So positive things there, even though he's coming off a loss, still looking to be our number 1 into the playoffs. And ESPN's still saying at the end of the season. So we'll see how that turns out. Our number 2 right now, Light Rail Coyote, really on a rough skid here over the past few weeks. Snuck out a couple of wins. Otherwise, it could have been much worse. You could have been sitting at 7 wins or even 6 wins at this point instead of the 8. But you're there now. The real scary thing is, as I mentioned, under 100 points 3 of the last 4 weeks. So still hanging out towards the top right now, really on the strength of the first half of the season. So we'll see where that goes, and I'll make a comment here about points against in a minute to see how that factors in. Our number 3 seeded team at this point, Hail Murray, and he is also a lock to make into the playoffs with his 8 wins. So I know he's happy about that. However, not doing himself any favors with his roster management either. Now, one thing I will say about Hail Murray's team is that he's been extremely consistent. If you look at his point totals, he's not had any explosive games. He's not been over 160. But even with this 109 of this past week, which was his lowest of the season, he's only got about a 50-point swing between his highest and his lowest score. So he's been pretty consistent. Compare that to Gloop's 90-point swing, and you see that there's a lot more consistency there. Now, of course, Gloop's lowest score is still a point higher than Hail Murray's lowest score. So when you're scoring more points, the odds are always in your favor. But solid-looking team, still scoring a lot of points. So Hail Murray's looking pretty good, entering into the playoffs, and has a shot to actually get the number 1 or number 2 seed and get that first round bye. Now, it's interesting looking at the probability for making the playoffs that ESPN has projected. I'm not going to pretend to know all the numbers that go into it. Certainly, the record has a huge effect, but so does the points that you're scoring and the injuries that you have on your roster. So that has a pretty solid effect. I'm not going to go to the next best record at 6-5 because that record is not the next most likely to make the playoffs. Fantasy football team, even though a game back from Team Who Dat, 34% more likely to actually make the playoffs at 88%. Probably based on second most points scored, just a little bit behind Augustus Gloop. And well, that makes a big difference because when you look at the numbers, Team Who Dat actually has scored the fewest points in the league. So I can understand why they're not real excited about him making the playoffs. With 3 games left to go, he could easily fall out, but he could also sneak his way in since he is a game up on everybody else. Barrel Scrapers coming in and Kittens Mittens both pretty close at 57 and 63% respectively, so very likely to make the playoffs. Kittens Mittens doing pretty well over the past 3 weeks. 2 of the past 3 really good scores. Had a hiccup there in the middle at 88. That's not going to do so well if he's got that going forward, but we'll see how that goes. And when we look at Barrel Scraper, he's looking at he's got the 4th most points scored. So again, not hitting any real high numbers, not considerably high numbers based on what we've been doing this year, but good enough to get himself a almost two-thirds shot at making the playoffs. Then we get into Team Who Dat at 54%, and probably based entirely on the fact that he's scoring the fewest points out there on average in total. So we'll see if he can sneak his way in or if his team starts to click a little bit more. I'm not going to really comment on Poncho, Reed, Hold My Beer. They're muddling down towards the bottom. And we'll see what comes of that. Now, I did think it was interesting, speaking of Reed option. Now, it's not that Reed isn't scoring points. He's got, there are 2 teams that have scored fewer than him, so he's 7th. That's not great on the bottom half, but he's not dead last. What I think is interesting is the points against. It is no coincidence that the top 3 teams, the 8-3 teams, in order, Gloop, Hail Murray, and Light Rail Coyote, are the 3 teams who have had the fewest points scored against them in that order. Now, Gloop is scoring the most, but we're also scoring the least against him. Obviously, he's going to have the best record if that's the case. Now, here's an interesting point of comparison. Read Option has 1,700 points scored against him. Gloop has about 1,370 scored against him. That's 330 points difference. Okay, so over 11 games, that's 30 points on average a game that we score against Reed, more than we score against Gloop. It's no wonder he's sitting at the bottom. I don't know what it is. I don't know what how the schedule worked out, but it's very difficult to have a 30-point swing, have 30 more points on average every week scored against you, and compete with the guy sitting at the top of the division. So I can understand the problems that he has with that. So obviously we work hard every week. We know what we have to do. We need to win every game regardless. But we also want to make sure that we've got our roster set to go into the playoffs. As we think about who's going to start scoring, whose teams are going to be making a playoff push and not taking a break. Will injuries really have an effect on Don Chris? Will he be able to make it back? Will Hail Murray continue his consistency in scoring enough points? Will he consistently score enough points? And will Team Who Dat get himself into the playoffs and do anything if he gets there? We'll see over the next 3 weeks.